Hey there. So, it's been a while since I've made a video, but all this bullshit going on with Russia and Ukraine has really got me thinking. And, you know, people can be dumb as fuck, and I just took like over an hour just writing some stuff down, figuring out how I'd lay this video out, and try to do it in 25 minutes or less. But anyway, I need to hurry up, get started with this thing, because there's some very basic life principles that people don't seem to understand. You live with these concepts, these ideas, these principles for 40, 50, 60 years so far of your life, and you still don't understand them. Okay, so check this out. Causes of World War III. Yeah, I know it hasn't happened yet, but it's about to happen. As a matter of fact, I was watching a political show this morning, and I watch, a few different news shows, and in this instance, it was actually ABC's This Week, and one of the guests there, I don't normally watch that show, I don't even know the people's names, but I just happened to be flipping channels, and I ran across This Week on ABC, and one of the women on there was actually saying that she and some others believe that we're already in World War III, that this conflict in Ukraine, the Russia-Ukraine war, that it actually is the opening salvo of World War III. Okay, and so there's that. But in terms of the causes, I've narrowed it down to three basic causes of World War III as it unfolds, as it begins. And I don't think it'll be that long lived. I don't think it'll even make 6 months. But that's the good news. The bad news is if we fire off hundreds of nukes, that'll be the reason why it doesn't last 6 months. Because we'll all be toasted. But no, I don't think it'll get quite that bad. I'm not one to use hyperbole. And but I do think we're going to have something in the way of World War III. It's just not going to be years-long war. A few nukes will get fired, and then it'll give people pause, and they'll back off, and But that's let me not give you too much of a spoiler. Anyway, so first reason that I'll state for World War III is this concept of returning to the violent boyfriend. Now, guys, some of us are real cool-headed. I consider myself to be a real cool-headed guy. It's very hard to get me off my square. And so us cool-headed guys, we've talked amongst ourselves and we've complained about how that woman's dating man number one. He turns out to be violent. She breaks up with him and gets friends to help her get away from him, yada, yada, yada. But then she goes and she dates boyfriend number two, and he's real calm and laid back, easygoing guy, and he's just not that much fun. So she breaks up with him just because he's not enough fun, and instead of going to man number three, she returns to man number one, the one who used to beat her ass. Okay, and we laid back, easygoing guys have said, why didn't she go to man number three? Why did she go back to number one, who used to beat her ass? Right, because he's fun. But anyway, so using that idea, I would say that returning to that old violent boyfriend is what's going to get us into World War III. And that old violent boyfriend is what we used that got us into World War I. at the time, it was just called the World War because we didn't know there was going to be a two or a three for that matter. But so in the late 1800s, a number of different countries had come up with all these different treaties and alliances, and said, you scratch my back and I'll scratch yours. Anyone attacks you, an attack against one is an attack against all. So we're gonna go and we're gonna defend you if anybody attacks you. And then Archduke Ferdinand from Austria-Hungary was assassinated by some Serbians, a group called the Black Hand, and that precipitated the events that led into World War I. Okay, and it was because they had all these alliances and treaties and said, if you get attacked, I'm gonna help you out. And like they say, what a tangled web we weave, and so you can look it up. I'm not going to belabor that topic too much, trying to keep this short. And I actually got ahead of myself because that's further down in my notes. But yes, so now we've got NATO, and we've got the United Nations, and we've got the G7, and it was G8 till they kicked Russia out, and we got the G20, and I wonder, has that become the G19? But anyway, so we got all these alliances, and now we've got this alliance called NATO, which I referenced a minute ago. But NATO in particular is a horrible alliance. I mean, its framing is horrible because its primary duty, is to ensure that Russia doesn't try to take over other lands, that they don't try to change national boundaries by force. Okay. Now, some people will come up with these semantics and say, "Oh, Eric, no, that's not quite what the mission says." But long story short, if there are 21 people at a gathering, at maybe a meeting, a business meeting, and one is a man and the other 20 are women, and they start laying down ground rules for the meeting and saying, in this space, there's not going to be any male chauvinism, there's not going to be any mansplaining, then the guy's going to be like, well, hey, I'm the only man in the room, so those rules are made just for me. They're not made for other men. They're not made for the women. Those rules are made just for me, and it's kind of the same thing here, where if Russia is the only nation in Eurasia that has the potential, the ability to break a certain rule, a certain law, then that law was made for Russia, and if a certain entity is created to make sure that nobody breaks that law, and if Russia is, well, I shouldn't say the only one that can break that law, but the most capable. If Russia is the most capable entity that can break that law, and if the next most capable nation is a very, very distant second, then, from where Russia stands, that law was made for Russia. Okay? And so, yeah, there you have it. But, so NATO, it was created primarily to keep Russia in check. And look here, so you gotta understand the thug life a little bit. All right? Now, I know I have some interesting analogies and metaphors here. The old violent girlfriend of alliances that led to World War I. And now here I am talking about thug life and how Russia, especially Putin, they're thugging out and they don't like NATO. I mean, it's kind of like boys in the hood not liking the cops, if you will. But check this out. So, Uh, NATO was created in 1949. It had 12 member nations. It is the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. So these 12 nations came together and said, hey, if Russia ever jumps out there, at that time Russia was the USSR, the Soviet Union, and they were like, if the Soviet Union ever jumps out there and tries to expand its borders, all 12 of these nations here, we're all going to come together and we're going to smash the USSR. Okay. And at 1949, Joseph Stalin was still in power. He died in 1953. After him, there were 6 more Soviet leaders, the last of which was Mikhail Gorbachev. And since then, Russia has had, well, the USSR became Russia, and Russia has had 3 presidents, the first of which was Boris Yeltsin, and then Vladimir Putin, and then we went to what's his name, Medvedev, and then we went back to Putin. Okay, and so out of these 10 guys, Putin being the current one, 9 of them did little or nothing to stop the advance of NATO, the expansion of NATO, and so now the way Putin sees it, it's kind of like this: hey. Imagine 2 guys out in the hood, in the street, arguing, getting ready to fight. And so one guy says to the other, you wait right here, man. I'll be right back. Now, if the guy he's arguing with has any kind of street smarts whatsoever, he's going to know that homeboy's getting ready to go get a gun, or get his friends to come back and help with the fight. And homeboy knows that if he lets this dude leave and come back, then when the dude comes back, it's going to be a harder fight. And the guy who just stood there and waited for a dude to come back, he actually is bound to lose because he allowed his opponent to go get a gun or go get a partner to help him in the fight. Okay, and so anyone in the hood knows you don't let somebody leave after they say, that they're going to come back at you. You whip that ass right then and there, and make sure they can't go away to get a gun, and make sure they can't go away to get a partner to help them in that fight. Okay, so that's just part of the thug life, and so as NATO, started with 12 nations in 1949, and then over the past 73 years, they've built up to 30 nations. So what that means that 18 times NATO said, you wait right here, Russia, I'll be right back. And through these 9 previous Russian leaders, 7 Soviet leaders, and 2 presidents besides Putin, they've just kind of stood there and waited for homeboy to come back with another friend to help him in the fight. So now NATO consists of 30 friends, all of whom are ready to gang up on Russia if Russia ever jumps out there. Okay, and so Putin is like, hey, if y'all were real thugs, Joseph Stalin or Mikhail Gorbachev or Andropov or Khrushchev or Brezhnev, if y'all were real thugs, y'all would have told NATO, hey, no, you ain't going to get nobody else. We're going to fight right now, and that's kind of what Putin is up to. It's like, we're going to fight right now before you go get anybody else. And this 31st one that you want to go get, it's the country of Ukraine, which shares a border with Russia. And so he's like, no. Y'all can't do that. And besides that, you got to remember that NATO wants to make sure that they have their defenses ready in case Russia decides to jump out there, okay? And yeah, they're talking about Russia breaking international law, talking about Russia, quote unquote, doing wrong. I get that, and you want to prevent Russia from doing what you perceive to be wrong, okay? And so I'm not even arguing with that. And I'm not saying Russia's nice. I'm not saying Putin's nice. I'm not saying Putin's doing the good thing, the right thing, but he's smart within his own right. He's a good thug. He knows how to thug. how to thug out. Okay, and so that's what you're up against. And he's like, nah. Y'all want to get your defenses ready in case Russia jumps out there and breaks international law by changing the boundaries of this or that nation by force. Okay. And so NATO is a preparatory defensive organization, just preparing its defenses in case Russia does wrong. Well, Putin's like, okay, you know what? We're going to do wrong right now. We're going to jump out there and we're going to get this shit started right now. And I'm going to stop you from putting NATO defenses in the country of Ukraine. Okay. And so, yeah. And that's pretty much what it boils down to. And so we should have seen this coming, and I haven't been using my notes, so but let me see. So let me go back to my notes here. So I mentioned the assassination that led to World War One. Oh, so check this out. So after World War One, people just kind of assumed that we'd never go there again. We'd never again let things get that bad to where we have a worldwide war. But of course, they turned out to be wrong. And in 1939, we began World War II. The U.S. got pulled in on December 7th of 1941 when Pearl Harbor was attacked. After World War II, in 1945, we began the creation of the United Nations because he said, hey, look, you can't just assume that we won't go there again. After the end of World War I in 1918, it took 21 years to go there again, so now we have to be proactive, and they made the United Nations. Okay. And then NATO was established in 1949, like I mentioned earlier. And so, yeah, I mentioned that NATO is an anti-Soviet / anti-Russian entity. You can use all the semantics you want to, but that's what it boils down to. Okay. So, anyway, so NATO's existence is the cause of the Russia-Ukraine war. And so I would say that not Russia, but NATO existing is the very first antagonism that led to this current moment of there being a Russia-Ukraine war. And then the Ukraine trying to join NATO was the secondary and more current, more recent antagonism that led to this war. And I'm looking for something in my notes real fast. Yeah, so people want to talk about these war crimes, the terrible things that the Russian army is doing. But we have this old expression that all is fair in love and war. And then I would add that you have to remember that if Putin sees himself as someone who is ushering in a different world system, a different world order, then he's not going to go by the rules and the laws of the old establishment. He's just going to see himself as someone who is above the current law because he's going to usher in a different set of laws, a different type of world order. And I kind of see where he might be going there. But let me also say this too, that this issue with Ukraine is very similar to the Cuban Missile Crisis back in the early 60s. JFK didn't want to allow the newly communist Cuba to acquire missiles from Russia because Cuba is only 90 miles away from the U.S., from Miami, and so JFK didn't want a government with a very different view, a very different style to be so close to us and to have missiles, nuclear missiles. Yeah, and so that's what led to the Cuban Missile Crisis. That's what led to the Bay of Pigs invasion. You can look all that stuff up. But I should also point out that before the Cuban Missile Crisis, some would say that it was the cause of the Cuban Missile Crisis. But what happened was that the United States, as the leading partner in NATO, they said, we're going to put 250 nuclear bombs in 5 different European countries, including Turkey. And so they put about 50 nuclear bombs apiece in these 5 different countries. And I know that Turkey was one of them, and I think Germany, and there are a few others. But anyway, so they did that for 2 reasons. Number one was to scare the USSR, like, don't jump out there, USSR, we got you, we'll nuke you. And also to assure the various NATO allies that, yeah, we are willing to go there. We are willing to have a nuclear war if that's what it takes to stop Russia's advance, okay? And the U.S., of course, bombed Hiroshima and Nagasaki in Japan, so, we just wanted to show that we are still gangsta and we are still willing to go there. And just like we killed about 200,000 Japanese people in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and of course the surrounding areas, we'll do it again if Russia jumps out there. And so so the U.S. used a threat, and the U.S. wanted to feel safe with this whole Cuban Missile Crisis thing, but the U.S. also was willing to threaten Russia by putting all these nuclear bombs in these 5 European countries, okay? And let me see what else I've got here. Oh, and also, so let's go way back to Teddy Roosevelt, who was president from the fall of 1901 until March 4th, 1909, okay? And so he used what was known as gunboat diplomacy. Yeah, he was known to say, speak softly and carry a big stick. And he liked the idea of having the gunboats a few miles out at sea while he is having talks with national leaders, and then if things don't go well, he can ride out, and then he can give the order to attack, and they'll be ready to attack just moments after the talks fail. And I see that I'm at 23 minutes, but anyway, so we've used these sorts of threats a lot, but the U.S. government doesn't want to be threatened, and oh man, so I've already covered a lot of stuff. So anyway, we put Russia in a position where it was like either they fight now, or they have a bigger fight later on, and that's kind of what Vladimir Putin was pissed about. Was he's like, okay, so Stalin, you didn't fight against NATO when there were only 12 nations, and now, several Soviet leaders and presidents later, we've got 30 nations that are part of NATO, and he's like, well, I'm not going to let it become 31, because 31 is right up on Russia's border, and if I don't stop it now, then I'll never be able to stop it. And so, I'm gonna, I think my video is gonna change over real soon. But anyway, I should point out that the U.S. is willing to make Russian citizens suffer, and not just the U.S., but all these various alliances, NATO, United Nations, the G7, so like I said, we're going back to the old boyfriend, all these alliances that led up to World War I. we're back at that. We didn't learn. Um, but the U.S., NATO, uh, they're willing to, and these various nations are willing to let the Russian citizens suffer, and it's nothing new because we've had a trade embargo around Cuba for over 60 years now. And so yeah, the citizens become pawns, and the U.S. seems to be okay with that. And so let me see. Um, so I was watching. I think I might have actually mentioned that earlier. I got ahead of myself, and but I'll say it again that I was watching ABC's this week, and one of the ladies on there said that mutually assured destruction really only works and keeps nations from fighting each other, nuclear nations from fighting each other, if both of them think that they're both going to lose. If one side thinks they're going to win, then the mutually assured destruction idea actually doesn't work out. So you're counting on both of them figuring that we're both going to die here, both of our nations are going to be annihilated, and then of course they decide not to fight. But it seems kind of crazy that you would have all these different nations develop nuclear weapons which are designed to kill, and